the New Zealand Tech Podcast, brought to you by Gorilla Technology, proactive and strategic IT.
Hey folks, greetings and welcome along to the New Zealand Tech Podcast. Great to be back with you again. I'm your host, Paul Spain. Bill Bennett, nice to have you with us today.
Hi, Paul.
Thank you for joining us in studio. It's been
Always
a little while.
a pleasure. Yeah, it has been a while, hasn't it?
Yeah. Great to have you in the new podcast New Zealand HQ here in City Road, Auckland. Before we kick in, maybe you can remind listeners where you fit into this big wide world of tech and journalism.
Well, I'm a journalist. I've been a journalist for a hell of a long time, covering business and technology. Still do lots of business, still do lots of technology. These days, probably more telecommunications than general technology. I have my own website, which is at the moment is mainly my newsletter, which is to download weekly. Though I will get back to putting more regular stories on there. But at the moment, I'm just too busy with the journalism. So that's where I am, really.
Great. Well, always good to have your insights, and I know we're going to have a bit of debate around a few topics today. Yeah. I'm very keen to delve in, talk a little bit about what's happening in New Zealand with Sky and some of what's going on with their decoders. Whether the technology, Darth Vader AI, I'm calling it, is a safe track to go down. Probably more importantly, this huge data breach for Optus in Australia as to, what's the right approach in terms of, paying out ransom versus not, and how they're handling that, and a bunch of other topics there I'm keen to delve into as well. What's happening in the world of autonomous air taxis as we hear a bit of a wind down there from Kitty Hawk, Meta and Google sort of quietly laying off staff. But let's start on Sky, very locally relevant. And of course, a reasonable percentage of New Zealand's population have been Sky subscribers over the years. The picture has, of course, changed since we've had so many streaming options. Yeah. But we've got a change coming up, haven't we? And we've also, I guess there's two parts to the change. One is Vodafone, the Vodafone TV box, which has been a really cool option in terms of getting access to Sky's services and content in the past is about to disappear, right?
Yeah. Well, there's two things happening. One is the Sky box, which is the traditional satellite decoder, and it does other stuff. Box that's been overdue for replacement for some time. I think we've been talking about it being replaced for at least a couple of years now. Yeah. Certainly for some time, and that is being replaced, and that. There was talk of it being replaced by about now, but that's all been held up by COVID. And we've talked on this podcast before about things like the supply chain problems and so on. So it's understandable that it's been held up, and it's now going to happen. Sky's now saying that people will be able to get them by Christmas, and you'll have to pay $200, and it's basically a hybrid decoder. It's going to have a terabyte of storage in there. So $200 for a terabyte of storage. You'll be able to decode satellite video, and you'll be able to get broadband video through that box as well. It will run apps. It will almost certainly run rival apps
like Netflix.
And yes, it's definitely going to run Netflix, and possibly Sky people will be able to get Spark Sports app on their decoder as well. And it's a bit controversial in some circles that people are expected to pay $200 for it, and you can get away with not paying $200 up front if you pay so much a month extra.
Yeah, I think it was $10 a month or something.
Yeah, but I think you get quite a bit for your $200, but normally it would be the case when you get, say, a broadband account that you can get a modem when you sign up for a certain length of contract. You might expect Sky to do one, given that their satellite subscriber numbers have been dropping. So asking them to pay $200 is probably a bit brave on their part, but there you go. The Sky Pod is it's a streaming only device. It's a broadband only device. It doesn't include a satellite decoder, and it doesn't include any storage, and that's $100. At the moment, and it's also the replacement for the Vodafone TV box, which is, again, was showing its age a bit.
Yeah.
And at the moment, for the next few months, only people that are on Vodafone TV will be able to get the Sky Pod. And Sky say that for now, you can't convert from being a Sky decoder customer to a Sky Pod customer. That path isn't available to you at the moment, although that could change in the future. But the problem with these things is because of the delays in getting the technology here, the supplies are short. So not everyone's going to be, although the rollout will start by Christmas, not everyone will get their boxes by Christmas.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, look, I think Vodafone did well with the Vodafone TV box. That was probably, well, it was tied in with them being part of Vodafone Group originally. It has running costs and so on associated with it. These things aren't free. You've got a whole lot of cloud capabilities in behind the scenes, and so now that they are they're no longer owned by Vodafone Group, those costs will be very realistic. Well, they're all going to be passed on. And I can see that just didn't make sense. The tech, as we know, technology moves reasonably quickly. Well, so it's been a reasonable run, but Vodafone have put that offer out of send your old Vodafone TV back as well.
It's going to. It's still. I think it's now on target to close end of November, but it was due to be closed by about now. I think they've held it back, and because of people not being able to get the replacement boxes. I don't know if this is if we're on the second or third Vodafone TV box at the moment. The boxes that people, the Vodafone TV boxes have, there's certainly been a couple of them. And we were talking before the podcast started about how long ago we went to the first Vodafone TV launch. I think it was about a decade ago now. It was certainly getting on.
In the early ultra fast broadband, fiber days, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. And back then it was quite radical, and it was like really important. I mean, it's still important, but it was almost like the gateway drug into the UFB fiber was kicked off by Vodafone TV. That was the first wave of people switching from copper to fiber and getting something fresh and new that they wouldn't be able to do before.
Yeah, and I mean, at that stage, we didn't have the likes of Netflix even available in New Zealand. There was there was virtually nothing. So
people were accessing Netflix.
Oh yeah, but we certainly were talking about that and how to get it, but it hadn't been launched officially in New Zealand.
Yeah, and I think the first one was Lightbox, of course, which was Spark. And anyway, so the thing is, we're at that point now. Sky seem to have their act together. And it's just a bit slow rolling out. And I don't think we can blame Sky for that. I think that's the supply chain problems that are affecting anything technical at the moment. There's all kinds of problems elsewhere, and there's been some sort of local shortages of PCs and other bits of kit as well. So it's finally happening. The logjam is over.
Now, moving to Australia, Optus, huge data breach. We were talking about this before the show. You reminded me that regardless of what the numbers are, and there's some different comments around exactly how many, but it's sounding like it's in the region of 10 million people's data, which, as you commented, well, that's a third or more than a third of the Australian population whose data has been compromised. And we're not just talking about a name and an email address here, are we, Bill?
Well, in some cases we are. Some of the data is a name and an email address, but a lot of the data includes things like either passports or driving license numbers and so on, because Optus were asking people for that information to verify their identity, and they were doing it online. And
they say millions of driver's license and passport numbers stolen. So not just a very tiny percentage.
No, it's not tiny, but it's a percentage.
Yeah.
But 10 million people in a country like Australia, it's about 27, 28 million population. Given that some of those will be babes in arms and not up to the mobile phone age, it's probably like 40% of people who could have a mobile phone account will be covered. You can really, pretty much there won't be a household in the country which isn't affected one way or another by that. So it's absolutely major. What's emerged is that Optus were a bit. Whether or not they were, obviously there was some negligence involved, or that wouldn't have happened. But whether or not they were, how negligent they were is going to be something that's going to be debated in Australia in the coming weeks. That's already started. We were looking at news stories earlier, and there's already fingers being pointed, and the ministers involved, and so on. Optus they've come out punching. The CEO said, "Well, we're not really to blame for this," which is a bit rich. It's probably a bit strong, but the thing that Optus was really naughty, if you like, and I'm going to use the word naughty because it wasn't an illegal thing to do, but what they shouldn't have done is they shouldn't have kept things like passport numbers and driver's license numbers, because if they're using that for verification, you collect that number, you verify the person is who they say they are, and you can wipe that number from your database. There's no need to keep that. And this is something that a lot of corporations do. They're far too greedy about keeping personalized information that they don't actually need to keep. And that puts them at risk of something like this happening, which is far worse for Optus than if it had just been a list of names and email addresses.
Yeah, I think we need to take the lessons, don't we? There can be some benefit of holding on to that information in terms of needing to re-verify and check, and banks go through these things. But we look back a couple of other cyber incidents. We've talked about two local ones. Ministry of Culture and Heritage. They collected that information, left it in I think it was on a WordPress website, which look, WordPress is huge, but using it to store that sort of data is an unwise approach. We, in my humble opinion, we also had the one with the KiwiSaver provider, I think Generate. They had that data, it was left in an accessible sort of manner. Now that we've got these circumstances, hopefully that's enough to change the thinking around storing that data, because there might be some smaller benefit holding on to it, but when you look at these sort of scenarios, boy, the negative impact of keeping that, it's literally millions of people whose identities are at risk. Now
you can ask for it again as well. It's not hard. We should remind ourselves that Optus is actually owned by Singtel, so it's owned by Singaporeans, and Optus it's the number 2 mobile company, number 2 telco in Australia. They're very much the challenger, and they have things like business services and so on. So this is going to damage their reputation in those areas. I think history tells us that these things, there's a lot of fuss for a while, and they do tend to blow over. We do tend to sort of forget about big hacks a year or so after they've happened. But this is such a large one, and I just don't think it's going to go away that quickly for Optus.
Yeah, it sounds like there's going to be a lot of fallout. There's discussion around how it happened. Claire O'Neill, the Home Affairs Minister in Australia, said that the telco had effectively left the back door open to basic access, and there's been some information shared online around an API, a way that programmatically someone could easily get in and pull the data. Also indications that the Australian government would be lifting fines for these sorts of breaches. Now that New Zealand sort of went the other way with our new privacy legislation, very, very light in terms of this sort of stuff happens. there isn't too much onus on the company or the directors.
They have
And
mandatory reporting in Australia, so
so it's very, very different. And look, hard to get this stuff right. But I hope we learn the lessons and take the lessons away. And I think there will be many lessons from just how an entity communicates through to what's being done to minimize the risk of these sorts of scenarios happening.
I mean, it happened in Australia just before a long weekend as well, because Australia had Thursday as the day of mourning
That's
for
right.
the Queen, and huge numbers of people in Australia then took a 4-day
That's right.
4-day break.
Yeah.
So it happened just as they were going into that. So it dominated the news cycle for 4 days, pretty much, which maximised the embarrassment for the company.
Yeah.
Which means it's going to be harder to forget. The one thing that was curious about this was the story that they paid a ransomware fee.
This is the big part, isn't it?
Yeah.
And we often hear about the ransom pieces.
Yeah.
Maybe quite a bit later.
Yeah.
So what's your take? So should they be paying a ransom or not?
Well, for a start, it was $1.5 million, which seems remarkably
chump change in
remarkably
the
light,
scheme
yeah.
of a multi-billion-dollar enterprise.
Not only that, but the fines they face from the Australian government will be way, way more than that. Should they have paid it? Well, no. I my views on this. They shouldn't pay. You just simply shouldn't pay. If nobody paid ransomware fees, there wouldn't be any more ransomware, right? It's you're actually handing over the initiative to the other side. I don't think you should pay. I mean, I actually think that a company like Optus should be hiring a team of international detectives to go in and find these guys and make sure they're brought to justice. But I'm quite hawkish about that. And the reason I don't think you should pay is because I think once you've paid once, you become the target for everyone that's got, you're going to find a lot of people now thinking, okay, well, so Optus paid up. Wonder where we can get into their systems. So I think the trouble is by paying up and being and allowing it to be public that you have paid up, you're actually opening yourself to further threats.
Look, I think it is really complex. The latest updates I've seen this afternoon were saying that personal records of 10,000 Optus customers were released as a way to put pressure on Optus to pay that $1.5 million. So suggesting that it hadn't been paid. Then the next report after that is that there's some sort of backflip from the hacker, but there's suggestions they're going to keep releasing data. Now, I would stand on your side to a degree. So, look, if we could all just not pay these things when they happen, yep, that's absolutely ideal. It's gonna stop. Reality is that there will always be probably entities that are paying it. And we looked at the big pipeline hack in the US, and for the impact of it, it was again a smaller fee in the scheme of it. It was 4-point-something million, I think, USD. And apparently they paid that ransom with the help of the FBI, even involved in the in the process. Now, if they hadn't, the consequences could have been much larger. Now, I totally see what you're saying, but I mean, and it was probably similar when we had Waikato District Health Board scenario here. Like, look, it's probably not a lot of money. Yes, it encourages it to continue, but we know there's enough people paying that it's not going anywhere anyway. So, if Waikato District Health Board had paid that, then the chances are reasonably high that the confidential patient data that was leaked would not have been leaked. So the consequent, there would have been some benefit in paying
Yeah,
it.
look,
It's
I mean, it's not. I mean, I made it sound like it's simple, and it's not that simple. But there are countries where it's actually illegal to pay those ransomware demands.
and potentially it could be in New Zealand as well, because we do have laws about dealing with sanctioned countries, and you don't necessarily know for sure where that money's going, right? So if it were going to North Korea, for instance, then you're potentially going to get into some hot water by paying that ransom, just as an example.
I mean, we don't really know where this hack comes from. The Australians so far have all they disclosed is it comes from somewhere in Eastern Europe. Well, that's a lot of candidates for that. It may be that they know and they're not actually spelling it out. But Eastern Europe does seem to be the source for a lot of these things. At first, when this first happened, there was the fear that it was a state actor, a government sponsored hack from someone. It's beginning to. It certainly doesn't look like that now.
Well, let's see where this goes. Looking at some, and I don't know whether this is correct information, suggesting that the hacker may have deleted the data and that it was a mistake and rah. Let's hope this data isn't actually leaked, and that this is just a big warning for everyone. But even if it is, of course, we know that there are going to be future hacks, and we do need to still keep stepping up from a cybersecurity standpoint, as a country, and obviously as do others.
Yeah, I mean, it's fortunate that it happened in Australia and not here, but it could have been here.
Yep, and there may well be Kiwis whose data is in there as well who've had
there will be.
If
there's 10 million Australians, there'll be a lot of people who've lived in Australia.
Yeah. Now, James Earl Jones, the voice of Darth Vader. We are being told that James Earl Jones has effectively, retired, 91 years old, and he's been the voice of Darth Vader since the very beginning, and that artificial intelligence has taken over, and that's what we're now starting to hear in the content coming through from Disney.
His voice is emulated by a speech synthesis some way by AI. Yeah, I mean, this has generally been talked about in the past with actors being, particularly Hollywood stars who are no longer with us being able to be revived and put into movies. So you could, for example, have a modern movie with, say, I don't know, Humphrey Bogart in the thing, done by AI. For a long time, I mean, probably about a decade ago when this was first talked about, people were worried that there would be no more Hollywood stars because they would just become franchise properties who would be replicated by AI and so on. Well, that hasn't really happened. That's never really kicked in any major way. For something like this, I think it's probably acceptable to the fans that it happens this way as well. But it's interesting that it should be voice, and it seems that the guy involved has given his blessing for it to happen, which is fine. But I know there have been actors who said they don't want this to happen after they've passed on. So it's a kind of ethical thing, isn't it?
And how do you get it right? So if they're still making new content in 50 years' time, is the agreement such that his estate, keeps getting royalties or getting, payments over that, over that period? There could be some interesting sort of upsides in those regards. On another side, it means that a new voice actor isn't able to
Yeah.
take over the role. But we have come a long way in terms of the technology over that period of time. And I don't know, let's just say that you were a well-known actor, Bill, and you got the offer. Or let's actually let's say as a journalist, you can put a bit of info into the system. It can read all your existing stories, and you could get a system that's basically going to write your articles for you, or some the people that could hire you, so they could hire a virtual Bill Bennett to do the job in the future if the AI sort of was able to stand up to it, and still get that kind of uniqueness of how you analyze and write. Would you want that sort of thing to happen?
If I got paid, I'd be okay with it.
Yeah. So I guess we are going in a particular direction, aren't
Yeah.
we, on these things where AI can do more and more, and we can get AI to write articles. There's a lot of there's certain types of content today. Thinking of sort of share and stock sort of reports and things like that are AI generated. There are AI tools online to write blog posts and things for you. As far as the voice, it's inevitable, but how we kind of navigate this, I think we have to watch fairly closely. Obviously, the whole subject of sort of deep fakes and them being used in bad ways has been raised, and we've heard of these sort of vishing or voice phishing type scenarios where we're told that apparently there was a case where somebody got a call from what sounded like their boss and was trying to give them some directions, and in actual fact the whole thing was synthesized.
Well, look, the thing is that there are 7 or 8 billion people in the world. There must be someone else who sounds like that guy.
Yeah, or could emulate it,
or
right?
good enough. Yeah, close enough. There must be. So I think it's more to do with his branding, as his name and everything, than the actual sound of his voice.
Yeah.
And I think that's the key there. That it's about branding, and it's about some continuity, and it's also got it's also got Star Wars back in the newspapers again. So
they're always looking for any media attention.
So it's a bit of publicity for them as well.
Yeah. Now we've read about the shutdown of Kitty Hawk. Now this was the company. It was founded and funded by Google co-founder Larry Page as an air taxi startup, and I think they had 3 different projects that they were working on. And one of those had already wound down and had a recollection on it, maybe looking somewhat unsafe in terms of where the track they were going with that. They'd now winding down the company entirely, is what we're hearing. But they had done a joint venture with Boeing, which was the Whisk product, or Cora as it was originally known. I think still they have that for the actual aircraft as an autonomous air taxi, and of course Cora and Whisk had been operating in the South Island testing that product, and so it looks as though Whisk is going forward, but Kitty Hawk themselves are shutting down. What do you sort of make of this? Because it did sort of seem within that, I guess what sometimes gets referred to as sort of moonshot, type category. Yeah. Like, you're really shooting for something that is new, it's risky, it probably requires a lot of time and a lot of money, to pull off, and there's just no guarantee. So maybe this was predictable from the get-go.
I think so. I think it was high risk, but I think Page is in a position to go for high risk. And the other thing about Larry Page and Google in general is they are not, as an organization, they are not squeamish about killing off projects.
Yes.
I mean, they've always been willing to do that, which is actually kind of a good thing, rather than just keeping to pour money into a black hole. Look, the thing about the technology involved is, and I think this is similar to things like driverless vehicles and so on, is that you can appear to, if you look at the technology progress that you're making as an organization, you can appear to be making really fast progress, and you draw a straight line on your progress. You think 10 years from now we'll have this working sky taxi, and sky taxi service, and it'll be able to take 4 people and whisk them off to the cinema and so on. And it looked like that. And then what tends to happen with some of these technologies is the closer you get, the more you realize has to be done to finish it.
It's like the more you learn, the more you realize you don't know, isn't it?
Yeah, and that's exactly what's been happening with driverless cars. Is the closer you get, you realize that the actual goal of a fully autonomous vehicle that could drive from Auckland to Wellington, along the desert road and everything, in all conditions and so on, actually starts to look much, much harder once you get beyond having something go at 20 k's slowly round the Wynyard Quarter. And I think that's exactly the same thing that these people are up against with this project, is that the further you get down the path, the more progress you're making early on, you start to realize that there's these barriers which they're not necessarily insurmountable, but a new piece of technology is needed, or some fresh thinking from another direction is needed. And for a long time, for example, with understanding human speech, it was all about the algorithms and so on. And then eventually the problem was solved. I mean, it's not perfect today, but it's close to perfect, just by throwing sheer volume of processing power at the problem and vast scads of data. But 30 years ago, that wasn't even on the agenda. That wasn't the possibility. It was all about the clever algorithms. So that's what happens with this kind of technology, is that the path that you're heading along might not actually be the best path, right? And that only emerges at a later date. So I think something like that's going on, where it's like it's asymptotic. You get like an asymptotic line. It never actually hits the target. It's something like that, where the closer you get, the more you realize it is, the harder it is. And I suspect that the problem in this case, and I'm purely guessing, but this is from my experience of covering technology over the years, it started to look like it was getting more and more expensive to get to that point. And that doesn't mean it can't be done, but it does mean that the economics of picking people up in an air taxi and taking them to the movies starts to look, like it's not going to happen. And it might be cheaper to take them in a limousine to the movies or whatever.
Yeah, look, I'm really curious about this particular era, because it is one of those kind of just crazy eras when we first heard about it. We look at where we've got to in terms of drones, and the idea of one that's a bit bigger and can carry people. It doesn't sound so far-fetched. So I'm very, very curious to see how it progresses. But it's clear it is a big challenge to knock off and to get it right. And maybe we're still talking about this in another decade.
The thing that came to mind when I saw this story was, before I left the UK to come to New Zealand, which was a long time, almost 40 years ago, my job was I was the comms person for space science in the UK. And I remember at that time there was talk about manned missions to places like the Moon and Mars and so on. We're still talking about manned missions to the Moon and Mars and so on. But now that we know a lot more about space travel, it's actually a lot harder. So we now know from people being in the space station in weightless conditions for long periods of time, that if you take a long journey across the solar system, someone's going to end up a piece of jelly at the other end because they haven't had gravity for so long. And but that problem wasn't a problem that was on the agenda in the 1980s because we didn't know that then.
Yes, yeah.
So it's that same thing that something that you can anticipate all the problems that you see in front of you, but when you get further down the path,
you see a whole lot more.
Yeah, you see a whole lot more problems. Yeah.
Yep. Oh well, it's. I think it's. We've certainly got a fascinating time ahead. I've been following some of the some of the stocks because there's a few of these autonomous air taxi kind of firms that are listed companies, right? And they've attracted a lot of attention because it's such an interesting and a cool field. So people will I guess pop them up to higher prices. But as with other things that have come down over the last couple of years, we've definitely seen that drop away. I guess partly because of what Wisk have done here in New Zealand and sort of their approach. I'm still very hopeful that they'll pull something off.
Yeah. I mean, I think that there's probably a technical breakthrough that has to happen. I don't know, lighter batteries or something that doesn't seem to be on the immediate horizon.
And that's part of the challenge is the amount of time they can get in the air. Now onto other topics. We're hearing that the National Transport Safety Board, this is in the US, they've been doing some some work recently around accidents, and they've landed on a conclusion that we should have breathalyzers to sort of check for alcohol within vehicles. This technology should just be built in, just a standard part of what a vehicle has, just like it has a speedometer and it has a steering wheel and a brake and but from a safety perspective that seat belts have become the norm and airbags have become the norm. I find this one quite fascinating. Do you have a viewpoint on this? Because of course, once you start going down that track, it's like where do you draw the line? Do you have an AI that kind of it looks at your eyes? It's the AI says, well, you might not have been drinking, but you've had XYZ drugs, or there's all sorts of directions you could go with this, or you're a little bit tired and this and that, and so how safe should we make it?
Okay, if you're a little bit tired, you should probably not drive anyway, so that's okay. But I was thinking it can't be to do with detecting alcohol in the car, because if Jeeves is driving and Bertie Wooster's in the back with a bottle of champagne, the car wouldn't start. So it has to be about the driver, and it has to be AI detecting things, and there's all kinds of potential for it to, someone might have, I don't know, some kind of disease or condition, which may look to an AI like someone's drunk, and in fact they're not. That can.
Or if it's sensing alcohol, that it's sensing the breath freshener or other things, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's complicated. Obviously, they have an idea about how they're going to do this, right? It's a good idea if they can pull it off, but I think that it's the potential for it to go. There's two things, right? One is the potential for it to be another one of those things that we get closer to and closer to and don't never actually reach, right? There's that potential, but there's also the potential that there's going to be a lot of false positives. And you're going to find that you've worked really hard all day, you just want to get in your car and get home, you haven't had a drink or anything, and the car says, nope, sorry, I'm not going to let you do that, you're not fit to drive.
Yeah, and on the flip side, if it is just sort of a breathalyzer type technology, then people find some ways to to work around and to disconnect those types of things, don't they? So not to say they shouldn't try it, and if they try it as far away as North America, by the time they've figured it out, we probably would have figured out autonomous cars and
exactly,
and other things by then. So we will see. But we have that goal in New Zealand, getting the road toll down to zero. Personally, I feel in the short in their timeline, the only way you get to those sort of figures is very much technological. It's not about slowing everyone down so that you can you drive around your neighborhood at almost walking distance.
I think the other thing is that a lot of modern vehicles are inherently unsafe to pedestrians, for example. Those huge truck-like cars.
Yeah, you get hit with one of those going at speed, and you get hit by you're going to get taken out.
Hit by a 1960s Mazda, and you're going to get a minor scratch. Hit by a huge monster truck,
even at a few k's an hour. Yeah. So there's definitely some things to consider on that front. Now we've heard about Meta, Facebook, and Google cutting staff via sort of quiet layoffs. Now I don't know whether this is just a public relations thing, or why we are seeing this kind of new approach where teams are getting reorganized or disbanded, and people are being told they've moved to other roles, but without there maybe being the such explicit communications around exactly what's happening.
What happened for a long time? Organizations like Facebook and Google, and a lot of those big tech firms, they were desperate for talent, and they'd go out and they almost indiscriminately hire dozens, even hundreds of engineers to fill roles, and they could never quite get enough. So they probably overdid it at various times, and they certainly would have overdone it rather in the last couple of years. The thing is the economics have changed. I mean, both those companies are now relatively mature businesses, and they're not going to see the same growth that took them from zero to trillion-dollar organizations they are today.
Even if their share prices of recent times have somewhat suggested that they would still keep growing at those rates, right?
Yeah, but they're not going. It just isn't there. There just isn't that much headroom there. So I think for a start, there's that. The other thing is that both of these companies are dependent on advertising revenue, and that's down because of the a lot of that has gone because of Apple changing the privacy settings on an iPhone, which means that you can now decide that you don't want Facebook or Google sending information about the sites that you visit and the things that you do and the apps.
They can't personalize the advertising anymore, and that's an essential part of making their advertising
exactly.
work.
And I think that it's only now becoming apparent just how dependent those companies were on that. So I think that's on the way out too. Will there be mass layoffs across Silicon Valley? Probably not, because there's probably other organizations that use a lot of those people.
Yeah, I think you're right. Now, before we wrap up, one last topic that caught my attention was ransomware, the Lockbit ransomware builder. So this is a tool that can be used to make ransomware. Apparently leaked online by what one media source suggested was an angry developer. Now, what this does is it, I guess, puts in the hands of anybody at all, and it doesn't effectively cost a cent. Well, you do need to be able to host and run the software, but it puts it in a position where really anybody can get into the ransomware game. Now, this has been available through other mechanisms, for quite some time, but when this stuff is just made available on GitHub and anybody can download the code and get to it, could lead to something of a an increased escalation in ransomware.
Yeah, it can. A thing that I think we need to put this in context is that computer crime, online crime, has supply chains just the same as anything else these days.
Yeah,
Right. And at one point in the supply chain is this organization which builds the ransomware software. And there's other people further down the supply chain who actually, use it and know how to extract money or, or whatever. So it's just one part of the supply chain. I suspect that there will be some increased activity because there'll be other people that think, well, I got my hands on some decent ransomware. I can go and use it.
And it has happened. We've seen similar things happen in the past.
Yeah, but I was thinking in the past we used to talk about those script kiddies. The people basically who could just use packaged ways of putting together viruses and so on. And it's a bit like that, really. It's just been a modern version of that. Look, there's infinite room for more criminal activity in the world, unfortunately. So I think that they're probably
nobody wants to hear that, though. Bill, do we? We don't really want to hear that, but it is true. There's a lot of potential.
But I was also thinking, Paul, the flip side of that is if you download that off GitHub or wherever, right? And you are a first class cybersecurity expert, you could probably figure out how to stop a lot of ransomware as well by just unpicking that software.
Yeah, look, I mean, I think there's certainly always benefits from a learning perspective, and it might not even be in those scenarios, just for folks that are coming into the sector to learn and to understand, because you can pick apart the code and so on, and look, depending on what the approach is to the encryption, there may not be any easy way around it other than having the decryption key, but having access to that code gives you the best chance of looking and figuring it out. But yeah, very very interesting times. And look, I think this week just another reminder that our organisations need to we need to keep stepping up and improving from a cybersecurity perspective. I was in Wellington over the weekend to speak to a nationwide organisation about cybersecurity, and it was a fascinating discussion with some of the folks that I spoke with, and it's an organisation with sort of a lot of franchises around the country, and we have this huge challenge in New Zealand. It's certainly not unique to New Zealand, but small business owners have got so many things to think about, and trying to think about cybersecurity as just another big challenge.
I think
it's often just not. It's not even given the time of day, because there are so many other things to worry about.
I think that's true, right? But I think also the more that the information is out there in the open, and the more people talk about it and think about it, the more aware people become. Because actually, you can go like a long way to protecting your organization from ransomware and so on if people are just informed about the risks and
100%.
And basic practices like two-factor authentication, trusting nothing, trusting nobody, and so on. And really, it's a training exercise. I think that the money spent on training people in tackling computer security issues is probably far better than certainly better than spending money on products that will provide you with a degree of security. Maybe services is another matter, because
it probably depends on the products, and most organisations need they need a combination of approaches in order to do it, and a level of that is sort of having the right tools and the technologies, and configuring them appropriate, and monitoring and actually
just being aware
what
and
goes
taking
on.
an interest in what's happening in security circles, and knowing that this particular threat is going around at the moment is a long way. one way to solving the problem.
We're finished.
Yep.
That's us, Bill. Thank you very much for joining us. And a huge thank you, not only to you, Bill, but to our show partners, 2 Degrees, Vodafone, Spark, HP, Gorilla Technology, and Deal. So thank you to those firms for their ongoing support of the New Zealand Tech Podcast and their broader support of the tech and innovation ecosystems here in New Zealand. Bill, for those who are wanting to check out your blog, sign up for the newsletter, where do they need to go?
BillBennett.co.nz, and I'm on Twitter as Bill Bennett NZ.
Awesome.
And that's 2 N's, 2 T's.
2 N's, 2 T's.
Yeah.
Yep. Don't forget it, folks. And of course, if you're watching this on the live stream, definitely make sure you get into whatever podcast app you've got available on your phone. And get yourself subscribed or follow NZ Tech Podcast. It's free. If you're listening to the audio, then you can follow me on LinkedIn if you want to catch the live videos and get this content first. You can also subscribe on YouTube. If you're using YouTube, you do need to make sure you hit the bell, etc. And in fact, there are some similar things you can do on LinkedIn to sort of get notifications as well. But we're across LinkedIn, YouTube, Twitter, and Facebook. So whichever of those you use, feel free to follow so you get access to the content when it's live and fresh. All right, that's us. Thank you, Bill.
Thank you, Paul.
All
It's
right.
always a pleasure to be here.
Catch you all later.
Cheers.
Cheers.
The New Zealand Tech Podcast, brought to you by Gorilla Technology, proactive and strategic IT.